Hi, friends, and welcome to the Heartful Parent Podcast. I'm your host, Christy Keating. In this podcast, we talk about it all, our parenting, our partnering, and our professional lives, because they are all a part of us, and we were never meant to do this alone. Hey, podcast listeners. Welcome back to another episode of the Heartful Parent Podcast. I am thrilled to have you here, as always. And for those of you who have been reaching out by email and sharing thoughts and testimonials and ideas for future episodes, I just want to start by saying thank you. Thank you. I so very appreciate it. I have a guest today that I hope you will give your attention to and listen to, because he's talking about such an important subject, and frankly, a subject that many of us as adults don't want to talk about. Something that we don't want to talk about in relation to our kids, something that we don't want to talk about in relationship to our own partnerships, our marriages, our partners, our, whoever we are spending our life with, our boyfriends, girlfriends, etc. Because it's uncomfortable and it's potentially controversial. But as you will hear from this topic, it's not really that controversial when we dig into the evidence, the science, the research. The answers become pretty clear. But lest I give it too much of a spoiler, let me introduce our guest. Our guest today is a guy by the name of Parker Hymas, and Parker works with an organization called Fight the New Drug. Fight the New Drug is a non-religious and non-legislative nonprofit that exists to provide individuals the opportunity to make an informed decision regarding pornography by raising awareness on its harmful effects using only science, facts, and personal accounts. Parker is Fight the New Drug's Director of Public Outreach and is an accomplished speaker with a passion for developing and engaging communities. Thanks to a degree in communications, a keen understanding of public sentiment, and a talent for public speaking, he has presented to countless audience on Fight the New Drug's behalf, fostering meaningful connections and driving positive change. I have been aware of the work that Fight the New Drug has done for years now. It's really phenomenal work. And so I was thrilled when Parker reached out to me and said he'd like to have a conversation about all of this on the podcast. Like I said, there are many people that get kind of squirrely, if you will, around this topic, especially adults who have maybe used or do use pornography in the context of their relationship or privately, individually. And no one is here to shame or, talk down or do anything like that. But I do think there are some important conversations worth having. And even if we don't want to have them in the context of adult relationships, they're certainly critical to talk with and about with our kids. And that's what Parker is here to dive into today. So I hope that you will stick around for this one, that you will dive in and listen to all the great information and research that Parker has to share. He's super engaging. It was a really fun conversation, and I think you'll get a lot out of it, as I did. Without further ado, Parker. Parker, welcome to the Heartful Parent Podcast. I'm so thrilled to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is great.
So I want to jump in from sort of the very beginning here, which is to talk about Fight the New Drug and have you explain sort of what its mission is and how it began, how this organization started.
Yeah, so Fight the New Drug, if you're not familiar with us, we're a non-religious, non-legislative nonprofit, and our goal is to allow individuals to make an informed decision on the topic of pornography by raising awareness on its harmful effects using only science, facts, and personal accounts, which is a little bit of a mouthful. So essentially, we're research aggregates. We're not conducting research ourselves. We take research out of major institutions. We make that accessible, digestible, and available for everyday people so that they can make healthy and informed decisions on the topic of pornography. We believe the research shows its impacts, and that speaks for itself. And especially for young people today, many of them have never even considered that pornography might be harmful in the same way that Many people turn a light switch on or put gasoline in their car and they have no idea how an internal combustion engine works or where electricity comes from. Many young people, that's their exposure to pornography. They're exposed at a really young age because of growing up in the digital age with parents who didn't grow up in the digital age. And then they're just given a phone, oftentimes at a very young age. They're exposed very young, and no one's talking to them about pornography, but the people that are their friends, and they all think it's acceptable and normal. And so they've never even thought about porn or if it could be harmful. They've never even considered it. So
Right.
that's why we exist. We're here to educate and raise awareness on those impacts for all people, but especially young people. That's our target demographic. So
Love it. I love it. And I love that you're using it's research based, it's science based, and it's saying, "Hey, here's the information. Let's be at least making informed decisions about what we're doing." How did you get involved in this particular mission? Because I know a bunch of people work at Fight the New Drug, right?
yeah, I mean, our team's not very big. We're a nonprofit. We have a fairly small team. There's probably like 8 of us that work here full time or something like that. Um, But yeah, so Fight started in 2009. We actually just had our 15-year anniversary 2 days ago on March 3rd. So we started then, and I started working with Fight Through Drug in 2017. I started doing live presentations for them. And then in 2019, I started working for Fight Through Drug full time. Um, so I still do presentations. I actually am the director of public outreach now, so I oversee the presentation program for Fight Through Drug as well as some curriculum development and other things. But yeah, I kind of went to a community event, one of those live events, and I saw someone speaking and listened to the event. Um, and I wanted to be able to help. I had friends that were struggling with pornography at the time. I wanted to be able to help them. And so I went to the event, and afterward, I was like, oh, well, I've always wanted to do some public speaking. Maybe I can talk with this person after and see if they have any opportunities. And he was kind of like, oh, if you want to do public speaking, like, here's what you should do. And then didn't really like say anything about working with Fight the New Drug. And I was like, oh, well, that's a bummer, but I'm sure we can figure something out, you know? And so then someone I knew had actually helped set up and organize the event and brought Fight the New Drug to come speak. So I was helping them clean up just to be nice. And then when the speaker was going to leave, this person was like, hey, Parker's awesome. He's great. And he turned around. He was like, hey, actually, we're looking for outside presenters. Like, I couldn't believe that he just all of a sudden like switched gears.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, so that was probably 2016 or 17, and then I started speaking for Fight the Drug in 2017, and here we are now. So yeah,
Okay,
it's been
awesome.
a good little journey. Fight the Drug, we're always trying to develop new things, create resources, and raise awareness and create conversations around this topic. So
Yeah. Well, and I have to say, working in the parenting space and in the safety space, specifically in parenting, I hear a lot of different things from parents. One is just this, worry and panic about this, but not knowing how to deal with it. I also hear from parents, and we can dig into this a little bit. I also hear from parents like, oh, I looked at Playboy magazine when I was a kid. It's not that big a deal. Like I'm not that worried about it. Or even,
those are definitely older parents for sure.
yes, for sure, for sure. And then I hear some younger parents say, oh, I saw porn online and it, not a big deal. It hasn't ruined my life or whatever. So they don't worry about it that much. So there's almost seems to be two extremes
Yeah.
in this. So I'm curious, and we'll dig into the parenting piece a bit more, but I'm curious, you mentioned that you're non-legislative, non-religious, that you're just bringing research, and that there are presentations that are done. But how does Fight the New Drug really go about getting that research, getting that information into the hands of the people who need it?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously we use marketing campaigns, social media, live events. We create resources. We have a documentary, and all of these things, as well as many other programs like Fighter Club, are designed for people either to get involved and raise awareness, or for other people to get informed who are just unaware. Um, so whether it's a billboard campaign or social media or a live event or something, we're just trying to get this information to people, and all people benefit from this information, right? People who have strong moral beliefs about pornography, it's good for them to also understand the science and the research on those harms, especially for their kids or especially for young people who have only ever heard for moral reasons that they shouldn't consume porn. It gives them a lot more of a firm footing we hear time and time again from young people. They're so glad to hear it from this perspective, even if they're at a private Christian school or something like that. And then, of course, on the other end, if people don't have a moral obligation to against pornography because of a religious belief or something, we want to educate on its impacts on individuals' relationships in society and help them to understand that um, it's not as simple as, oh, I look at this, but it doesn't hurt anybody else. That's not true. That there's actually broad impacts of pornography. So really trying to cover the board, speak to all people, because ultimately, regardless of any diversifying factor, anyone and everyone can be impacted by pornography. There's no diversifying factor that makes you exempt from a struggle with porn, whether that's gender or race or socioeconomic status or any other factor. There's nothing that exempts someone from being able to struggle with pornography.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, well, then let's dig into that. Let's talk about what are those impacts. You just mentioned that no one's exempt. It can have broad reaching impacts on people. So for those who, haven't put a lot of thought into this, and my guess is that, most people haven't. Let's
Yeah.
talk a little bit. What are those impacts, and what does this do to the individual, and what is the impact that it's having on us more, from a broader sense, more culturally?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe to start answering that question by going back to something you said earlier is like, well, what's the big deal? I think we kind of need to um acknowledge what pornography has become. Like we're no longer talking about the research we're focusing on is definitely not talking about like images from a magazine or something, right? One of the things that we'll talk about is that as people consume porn, we see that they end up needing more extreme forms of content. That means that there's a demand for that content. That means that content gets produced, right? That's the way that the economy works, right? If there's a demand for something, it will be made. And so one of the problems is that this content has become extreme. It's not, still images in a magazine. This is content that has long-standing repercussions, especially when people are exposed at a very young age. So just to kind of clarify that. But as far as trying to give a concise answer to how it impacts individuals' relationships in society, because obviously there's a wealth of information on this, and trying to give a soundbite can be difficult. The first thing I would say is to dive really into that, we would recommend a few of our resources. So our documentary, Brain Heart World, it's a great resource. It's a 3-part documentary series. It's completely free. And that's kind of a 30-minute episode on how porn impacts individuals, a 30-minute episode on how it impacts relationships, and then a 30-minute episode on how it affects society. Or you can read some of our fast facts or get the facts articles, and they'll break down these issues a little bit more in depth. But the short answer is that when we're talking about individuals, we see from the research that pornography can be habit forming, it can be an escalating behavior, and it can impact mental health. So there are other impacts, but the 3 most important things to say are those 3 things, right? So people can develop a habit, a compulsive behavior, or even an addiction to pornography. I'm not saying that everyone who's consumed porn is addicted. That's not true, but there is an abundance of research to show that porn addiction is real and it impacts a lot of people. It shares many similarities to addiction to a substance like, say, nicotine that makes cigarettes addictive. And then it can be an escalating behavior. So, speaking of nicotine and cigarettes, when someone starts smoking, right, they smoke 1 or 2 cigarettes, but at some point that behavior escalates. They often end up smoking a pack of cigarettes a day or something like that. And that's because the pleasure response in the brain, it needs more of it more often in order to get the same pleasure response. And the same thing is happening with pornography. People need more porn more frequently, but it becomes incredibly problematic because they not only need more of it more frequently, they need more extreme forms of content when we're talking about porn. So that leads to escalating behaviors that can lead into more unhealthy and illegal forms of content or behaviors in real life, actually. And then mental health, that it affects individuals' mental health. Many people say they are seeking out porn because they're lonely, stressed, sad, or bored. And we see that the research shows that actually porn leads to poor mental health, lower self-esteem, poor body image, less fulfilling relationships, and more loneliness. And this is, again, just how it impacts individuals, right? Like,
Right.
we haven't even dove in yet to the relationship impacts, how it impacts society on a broader term. Um, so yeah, there are many ways that pornography impacts people, and we want to get that information to people so they can make those healthy decisions.
I mean, as you're talking about that, and I'm thinking about, you said your sort of target demographic is young people. Um, and we know that we are in a mental health epidemic right? For young people, depression is on the rise, anxiety is on the rise, right? There's uh all of the, there's and there's much more awareness about that and more talking about that, which is great. Um and I, we can't identify one single cause that we can, pinpoint and say that's why depression is on the rise. But inviting something into our lives or into our teens' lives that can heighten that even further strikes me as really problematic when we're talking about a generation of young people who are already more depressed and anxious than previous generations. And now we're saying here's content that makes it worse.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things to dive a little bit deeper into that mental health research, one of the things that we're seeing is that unfortunately, when we compare data from individuals who struggle with compulsive sexual behaviors, CSBs, compared to people who are part of general population studies, and we compare those two data sets, we find that individuals who struggle with compulsive sexual behaviors are twice as likely uh, to struggle with suicidal ideation and 3 times as likely to attempt suicide than those who don't. Now, to be clear, this is individuals struggle with compulsive sexual behaviors. Those are a myriad of behaviors, one of which being problematic pornography usage, PPU. So, obviously, a myriad of behaviors, but pornography is definitely one of those behaviors, and that's something to be aware of. And that's why ultimately we're trying to drive the caregiver, the adult, the parent to have these conversations. Therapy is great and there are wonderful resources available, but ultimately parents need to have these conversations with their kids. They can help more than they think they can. And simply having these conversations ultimately is often the biggest solution. It moves the marker the most.
Yeah. So I want to dive into that, but if it's all right with you, I want to go back for just a minute.
Yeah, please.
And because you had mentioned, and I know that you've got these amazing documentaries, and we will make sure that the links for those and where people can
Sure.
get them
Yeah,
are
of
in our
course.
show notes. Um, but you mentioned that there's also impacts on relationships and on society. Can you just give us the highlights of
Yeah,
the way that porn impacts both of those areas as well?
for sure. So if I think drug, we often say porn impacts what we love, how much we love, and how we think about the people we love. So porn impacts what we love because many researchers today consider it to be a supernormal stimulus. So a supernormal stimulus is an exaggerated version of something natural that over time our brain can prefer that exaggeration to what's normal, natural, and healthy. And we're seeing that with pornography, right? Research shows that individuals who consume porn over time lose interest in real life relationships and seeking out those relationships, creating relationships, being with a partner. um, it even shows that over time, some individuals find that they're unable to become aroused in a sexual encounter without pornography present, even with another person. So we're seeing the impacts on what we love. As far as how much we love and how we think about those we love, there's a myriad of research on how porn impacts how much we love, everything from higher divorce rates to more likelihood of cheating to couples just being generally less happy. There's one study that they followed couples over a period of 6 years. They were looking to see what would determine if a relationship would be less happy in the future than they are today. And
Mhm.
they found that when a partner is consuming pornography, porn was the second greatest indicator that that relationship would suffer over time. And I always get asked, what's the first greatest
Yeah.
indicator? People think it's going to be something like money or something. It's actually really interesting. I'm not sure why, but in this particular study, they didn't use if the couple started the study as unhappy as a control, right? Because if a couple's unhappy today, some researchers would have said in the study that that's a control because it's likely they'll be unhappy in the future, that that's not going to
Right.
change. They didn't choose to control for that. So the greatest determination of if a couple would be unhappy in the future is if they're unhappy today. And second only to that, it was pornography. Um,
Wow. I mean,
and
that's
then
pretty telling.
yeah, pretty
Yeah.
telling. And there's a lot of other research that people can get access to, like we said on our website. But jumping kind of to the world, how does porn impact society and our world as a whole, and some of those key touch points? Um, we're finding that pornography is becoming increasingly more violent and extreme, which we kind of talked about how that's because it tends to become an escalating behavior. People crave and need that more extreme content. The problem with that is we're seeing in research that between a little over a third to almost 9 out of 10 scenes, depending on the research you're looking at, contains physical violence and aggression. So it's incredibly problematic when young people are being exposed to this. And I just want to say, if your audience has made it this far in the podcast, and there's someone who doesn't think that porn is harmful or something, something to be aware of that we can all have common ground on is that at least young people to some age, everyone would agree should not be being exposed to pornography,
Right.
right?
Right.
Everyone would agree that there's an age for young minors that they should not be being exposed to porn. So I hope that you'll at least hold on to this conversation for that reason alone, regardless of the choices that you decide to make as an adult. We hope that you'll at least consider these impacts for children and young people today. Sorry to interrupt myself with that. But
No,
to
I
kind of jump,
really appreciate you saying
yeah,
that because I think, I sometimes say when I'm talking about various safety issues, like we can argue till we're blue in the face about whether porn is appropriate for adults. I hope we can all agree that it's not
yeah,
appropriate for kids.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And we would argue that the research shows that it's not healthy for anyone, right? There's
Right,
no
right.
healthy amount of porn consumption for anyone, but to be clear, we hope we can at least agree that the resources we have available can protect minors.
Yeah. Well, and I want to add to that. I'm a big fan of research in all, in parenting in all aspects. So, I and I think you're right. What I've read as well, and obviously you're way more versed than I am, that there are
Oh, I
harmful
don't know about
effects.
that, but
Well, on this particular issue, but that pornography has harmful impacts regardless of age.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, what we look at, what we consume is going to impact how we think and behave. And if that content is becoming extremely more violent, then we're hearing repeatedly from young people and seeing in the research that they think they're supposed to be violent when they're intimate with another person. Um, Pornography impacts a lot of the broader issues that we're dealing with in society. Recent research shows that because mainstream porn sites continue to use inappropriate racial terms to shock people into clicking on content. These things would never be allowed on YouTube, but on porn sites, it's allowed. And it shocks people into clicking on that content. So it promotes racism. It actively um, is problematic when it comes to um, having healthy perspectives of women. We see that in the research when people consume porn, they're more likely to hold sexist beliefs after consuming pornography than before consuming pornography.
Oh,
And
interesting.
then we kind of get down to how it impacts in other ways, because many people think that they're looking at porn and it doesn't hurt anybody else. But what they don't realize is that this industry is often unregulated and that there is sexual exploitation, abuse, and sex trafficking within the production of pornography. And that is a large topic that requires a pretty broad conversation. But what I would say is this: people need to understand the actual legal definition of sex trafficking in order to understand how pornography frequently is a cause of sexual exploitation and sex trafficking. And that definition is a commercial sex act induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or where someone is under the age of 18. So if there's a minor involved, or if there's force, fraud, or coercion, and there's a commercial sex act, so money or something else is of value is exchanged for sex, then that becomes sex trafficking, right? So money or something else of value is exchanged for sex, and there's a minor, it's sex trafficking, or if there's force, fraud, or coercion, it's sex trafficking. And we see these tactics over and over and over again in the research and survivor stories that there is routinely force, fraud, and coercion. Whether that be withholding pay, forcing someone to sign a contract, telling them that they'll never get hired again, blackmailing them, withholding legal documentation, changing the terms of a contract, changing the terms of pay, like all of those things that are routine practices within the production of pornography make it by definition legally sex trafficking. Um, and that leads to obviously a host of issues. We don't know if someone in that video is actually consenting when it's routinely common in mainstream porn to have teen be one of the most popular categories. Well, are these people really of age? We have no idea. We have no way to verify that, right? When we don't know if someone is a victim of sex trafficking, if it's sexual exploitation, if that video was uploaded with their consent, right? Is that revenge porn, or more more technical term would be sexual exploitation material, right? So there's just so many issues surrounding
Yeah.
pornography. It's not as simple as this doesn't impact anyone else. There's no way to know that the content someone is viewing was made, in a way that ensured someone was being paid, that they're of age, that they wanted to be there, that they could change their mind about that content being available later, right? All of these things are problematic, and we routinely see exploitation, and abuse within the production of porn. One of the best examples of this was Girls Do Porn. This was a popular, well-known, and often applauded within the industry company that was making pornography uh, that uh, people really wanted. And what they were found out to have been doing was essentially intentionally seeking out predominantly young, often naive, I say that with all respect, young women who had smaller social followings that posted like fitness and yoga content. And they would tell them they were flying them out to California to do fitness photo shoots, apparel, like model apparel, workout equipment, things like that, yoga clothing. And instead, when they arrived on set, these women were forced to sign contracts. They were held against their will. They were raped, drugged, and forced to be locked in a room with their abusers for sometimes 48, 72 hours on end to film
Wow.
content. And when they were done, that video was edited to look consensual. They were forced to be there unwillingly, and they were forced to sign contracts and sent home. And it took an embarrassing amount of time for these survivors to be believed. And at one point, one of the executives of this company was the second, he was on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list until he was eventually found in New Zealand. So there's really no way to know that the content someone was consuming was free of sexual exploitation, sex trafficking, a minor, something of that nature.
Yeah, I mean, and when even if we don't talk about the individual impact and the relationship impact, if we think about it from the standpoint that we could unwittingly be promoting the trafficking of humans,
Yes.
predominantly women, um, I mean, that in and of itself is pretty horrifying from where I'm sitting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, yeah, especially as someone who prosecuted those types of crimes, right? To think that there's this content and it is an unregulated industry. It's horrifyingly unregulated industry that the things that you're describing are allowed to persist um, with nobody stepping in to say, "Hey, this isn't okay."
Exactly.
So you mentioned that really the place that we hold power, one of the places that we hold power in stopping this or in preventing the harms that you've just so eloquently described, is in the relationship of parent to child, parent to teen. Um, so I'd love to have you talk a little bit
Yeah,
about that. And I think there are many parents that say, "Well, I know I should be talking to my kid about this, but what an uncomfortable conversation. I don't know how to have it. And I don't know what they need to know." Right. So, can you walk us through that a bit?
absolutely. And that is a very good way to phrase what we routinely hear from parents at live events all over the country and the world. You're not alone. First of all, if you're struggling, you're not alone. It doesn't make you a bad person, right? Shame says that someone's broken, they can't change, that this will never get better. That's not what our goal is today. Our goal is to help people to recognize that you're not the only person to struggle with this, things can get better, and that there's help ahead. And especially for a parent who has struggled or is currently consuming pornography, sometimes they feel unqualified to discuss this with their child, but they're more qualified than anybody. You know better than anybody the impacts of pornography, and you're their parent. You are the best person to talk to them with this, right? About this. So, some tips for parents about having these conversations. Um, that is, you summarized well the thoughts and feelings that race through parents' minds. And I would just say this. I often say as a joke when I'm presenting to live audiences, I say, back in the day, how many of you, when you were a kid, had this conversation or had a conversation about the birds and the bees with your parents, right? How many of you had the sex talk? And typically, I would say like a quarter to a third of the room, no matter where I am in the world, raises their hand.
Yeah.
And then I make a joke and I say, "Oh, well, my parents didn't have the sex talk with me either, and now I go around the world and talk about porn's harm. So if you don't want your kid to end up like me, you should probably talk about this with your kids, right?"
Uh-huh.
Um, and so it's desperately important we're having these conversations. And why is that? Well, back in the day, this conversation was pretty much the sex talk. Now we're dealing with technology, social media, predators, pornography, all of these issues. This can no longer be a poorly implemented one-time conversation that really doesn't get the kids information or answer their questions. This now
Right.
has to be frequent conversations that we're having, and we can do that in an age appropriate way.
Yep.
So the first thing parents ask is, when do I have these conversations with my kid? Well, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. So instead of looking for when is the right time, I want you looking for ways to have this conversation at any age instead of waiting for a certain time. So if they're 4 years old and they have access to devices because they consume content on an iPad or a television, then that conversation can be something like good pictures, bad pictures, right? Teaching
Yep.
kids that if they come across content that they're unfamiliar with, that they can talk to an adult and they can trust that they won't be in trouble and that it's not their fault and that they can get help because their parents love them. That's
And there,
not taking away anyone's innocence, right? That's just a simple solution to a problem that is going to happen. Kids are going to be exposed to unwanted content, whatever that might be, whether it's pornography or something else.
right.
But sorry, I kind of interrupted you.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, and there's actually a book on the market called Good Pictures, Bad
Yeah.
Pictures and Good Pictures, Bad Pictures Junior that
Yeah.
I will say I have used with my kids to open that conversation at an age when I wouldn't have known how else to
Yeah,
open that
absolutely.
conversation.
Yeah, that's what I was referencing, right? Good pictures, bad pictures is a great resource. And
Yeah.
then as kids get older, there are other ways to evolve these conversations with time. But it always needs to start with setting aside a time and a place, being prepared to have the conversation, teaching both your family values as well as the science and the research. And then above all else, abstaining from shaming our kids. It doesn't mean there can't be consequences. It's just recognizing the difference between guilt and shame and then providing support, right? Where do we go from here? What's the next conversation? Instead of saying done, okay, now what are we going to talk about next time? How are we going to follow up this conversation? And you can get access to all of this. I know it's difficult to listen to a podcast and then be like, well, wait, I'm still not sure where to go from here. We have a great resource called the Conversation Blueprint. You can just go to ftnd.org/blueprint or just go to our website, ftnd.org, and look for that resource. And this is going to essentially help you map out a conversation ahead of time. Whether you're trying to talk with a spouse, a partner, a child, educate the mailman on porn's harms, whatever it might be, it can help you plan that conversation ahead of time, which will relieve the anxiety that many people often feel that kind of makes these conversations difficult.
Mhm.
And I would like to politely suggest, I think you kind of alluded to it. The conversations are awkward, but unfortunately, sometimes the adult in the room is bringing some of that awkwardness by being unprepared. So,
Yeah.
in the same way you prepare for a job interview, you should be prepared to answer questions. You should have questions yourself. You should get them talking more than you're talking. You should have icebreakers. You should be prepared to talk about the research and your family values and all of those things. Just like you'd show up for a job interview and have past work to present and a resume and know the company and be prepared to answer questions and ask questions and all of those things. That's what we want to see when we're talking with our kids.
I love that you say that because I mean I have talked with my especially my teenager about this. We've started to broach it with I also have a 6-year old. So we're
Yeah.
more on the good pictures, bad pictures junior
Yeah.
version with her. But my teen and I have had multiple conversations about this. Um and I will fully confess as someone who kind of works in this space or, works in the safety space and certainly talks about talking to kids about sex and bodies and safety and all of that stuff. I'm not sure that I went in with a real thoughtful plan. And that resource that you just mentioned is one that I have seen, and it is so valuable to think through how are we going to roll this out and what are the
Yeah.
questions, or the things that we're going
Absolutely.
to do to get them talking.
And you know what the great news is for the parent out there who's like, well, I kind of had this conversation, it didn't go the way I wanted. Great news. You get to do it again. Like these conversations, like I said at the beginning, they have to be ongoing. They can no longer be a one-time conversation because it's not healthy or realistic to cover everything you need to cover under this subject in 2024 with your child in one conversation. That's unrealistic and unhealthy. Um, so
Well, no
these are
kid wants to sit
continuing
there and listen to
conversations.
that, right?
Yes,
Like they
exactly.
don't want to be
Yeah,
lectured at indefinitely. Like,
100%.
yeah,
And
small
you literally
conversations.
can't cover it, even if you tried. It's not possible to talk about everything you need to
Yeah,
talk about in one conversation, no matter how much time you got the kid to sit there for.
yeah,
You have to recognize that this is an evolving conversation that's going to take place over time. And just like the shampoo bottle directions say wash, rinse, repeat, that's the conversation, right? Like it just has to continue. It's something we have to follow up with. It's something that we can talk about this part today and this part next month or next year, right? So
Yeah. Something that jumps out at me, I mean, like you've shared all this great research, all this great information about the ways that it impacts, again, those three areas: the individual, the relationship, the society. Um, it would be so easy as a parent to go in with like armed with information, right?
yeah,
Lecture mode. And yet, I also heard you say that it's really critical that we get them talking more than we are talking. What have you heard from parents, or what is it that Fight the New Drug recommends to help that happen? Because some tweens and teens just shut down and they don't want to talk about it.
of course. Yeah. So yeah, don't do what I did today and just talk for an hour straight. That's not gonna be a solution to this. Especially when the solution is talking with our kids ultimately. Um, the first thing is to really remember that one of the main reasons I'm saying this is not a one-time conversation is because you might not get very far the first 3 times you have this conversation.
Hmm.
They might be 5 minutes long, maybe 10 at best, and you're really going to be like having some awkward dead space
Yeah,
or like prodding them with questions every once in a while to see if they'll open up a little bit. um, that's the biggest thing, is just keep trying. Teens are not necessarily, especially the later we start this conversation, what we tend to see is the more difficult it is to have. It doesn't mean don't start at all. It just means, when you tell a 4-year-old, if you see something you're unfamiliar with, come talk to me, and then you continue these conversations, sometimes that's a little bit easier than like starting at 17 or something, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't start, right? It
yeah,
just means that these conversations might be a little more difficult, and they're going to be difficult either way, even if you started when they're 4, right? They're teenagers. But just know that it can be 5 minutes and we can try again next time, right? Like
yeah,
if that's the best that we can do, then that's the best you can do, and just keep trying and keep opening it up, keep trying to normalize talking about these topics.
yeah. My friend and colleague Feather Burkauer, who is a safety expert on parenting, says, and I love this line. She says, "We as parents need to be willing to step into the discomfort so that our kids don't have to." And it strikes me,
Exactly. Oh, that's
right?
so
And
well
it
said.
strikes me
That's
that
what I've
that
been trying to
applies.
say.
Yeah, it applies so well even in this context, that if we're hoping to prevent all those harmful impacts from harming our kids, we've got to be willing to step into this.
Yeah, the parents, unfortunately, all due respect, you're a great parent, but we are often guilty of introducing the awkwardness.
Yeah.
Um, we're awkward, so our kids feel awkward, right? So we just have to be willing to kind of dip into that uncomfortable space in order to help make it comfortable for our kids.
Yeah. I also think that, at least with my teens, sometimes it helps when I acknowledge that it's awkward, right? This is going to be awkward. I know you may not want to talk about this. It's awkward for me too. And that seems to sort of break down some of those barriers,
Yeah,
whatever it is that we're talking about, not just with pornography, but, other
yeah,
challenging conversations.
yeah. Or
I own
spend the
it.
first 3 to 5 minutes not talking about what your goal conversation is, maybe, right? Like you can do either one, right? You can just acknowledge it's going to be awkward and then just charge ahead, and that's a great solution. Another great solution is talk to them about life for 3 to 5 minutes, make some jokes, crack a laugh, do something they enjoy while you're talking about it, and then start talking about the uncomfortable stuff once they've settled in a little bit.
Yeah.
That's another option. There's a lot of ways to go about it. And you might try one option one time, one option another time, and find out what works best for you and your child and your family.
Yeah. Parker, having worked with Fight the New Drug since 2017, actually, I have two questions.
Yeah.
One is, how have you seen things change over the last, 7 years or so, in this industry, and or in the, in the research related to it? Um, and then, coupled with that, now that we're in 2024, if there's one thing that you wish every parent could understand, what would that be? I know those are two big
No, that's
questions.
great. So the first one, what has changed the most? Um, Fight the Drug is, we have more resources than ever before, and hopefully I'll say that same thing 5 years from now and 10 years from now. And generally there are more resources than ever before, not just us, right? There's things, all sorts of people working on this problem to find solutions. Things are better than ever. There's access to more help and resources than ever. Mental health resources are more available and normalized than ever before, right? Like you can just go into most healthcare provider apps, like whoever your healthcare thing is, and schedule a therapy appointment. Like I'm not sure that you could do that 5 or 10 years ago.
Right.
I'm not sure that mental health therapy was seen as healthcare. Right. So that's just one example, but there are more resources than ever before. That's the biggest thing. But maybe on the other side of it, the issue is ever evolving, right?
Mhm.
There are other things that we don't have time to dive into today that people need to be more educated on that are coming, right? So things like OnlyFans, still problematic, AI pornography, still problematic, deepfakes pornography, still problematic. Those are kind of conversations for another day. You can get more information about those on our website, but those are the up and coming things that we need to be aware of and dedicate time to understand, because those are the things our kids are now facing. And then on the other side of this, the other question, I'm trying to remember, I kind of blanked. Can you remind me?
Yeah, what is the one thing
Oh, the
that,
one thing, the one
yeah, that you'd
takeaway.
love every
Yeah.
parent to know and understand about this?
Oof. This is a great question. And I'm not sure that people always love the answer, but it doesn't mean that it's not the right answer. The one thing I want every parent to take away is that your kids are starving for you to have healthy conversations with them about topics that parents feel uncomfortable about.
Mm.
They are pleading that you will have those conversations. I have spoken to countless, tens of thousands of youth, and the takeaway is always, I'm so glad that someone can look at me and treat me with enough respect to know that whether I'm an adult or not, these are issues I'm facing and that I need to be educated on them to make those healthy decisions. That just wishing it away or thinking kids are too young doesn't mean that they're not battling it anyway. It just means that you're starving them of the conversations that they desperately need. So the takeaway, the one thing I would tell parents is please have these conversations with your kids. Protect them, do everything you can to be educated yourself. There are more resources and information available than ever before, whether it's social media or pornography or anything that is could pose a harm to our kids today. There's more resources and help than ever before, and that we just kind of have to now go and have these conversations and put in the work and be prepared and have those conversations with our kids.
Yeah. I mean, that's a mic drop right there, right? Like that's what we all know, or all that's what we all need. And you said it might not be the most popular answer, maybe not, but I would concur with you that it is the right answer to the
Yeah,
question.
for sure.
So appreciate that. We will share, you have already listed so many great resources that Fight the New Drug has on its website. And we will make sure all of those are listed in the show notes. But I know that you also do live presentations. Fight the New Drug goes out into the community. Where can people reach out to you, or should they go through the website? What's the best way if that is something that they're interested in?
Yeah, please consider doing a live presentation. It's one of the best ways to kickstart the conversation in your community and actually make large progress, especially in a post-COVID world. That's actually what people want. They want to go to an in-person event and see someone talk. They don't really want to learn about something on the internet. They want that in-person connection. So the best place to go is just ftnd.org/live. You can find out more about our live presentation program, and you can schedule a call with our presentation coordinator. Her name is Haley, and that's just ftnd.org/live. So.
Awesome. Parker, thank you so much for the work that you're doing with Fight the New Drug and for bringing this really critical information to the Heartful Parent podcast. I know I learned some things today, and I'm guessing everyone listening has learned as well. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, everyone. I hope that you enjoyed that conversation with Parker Hymas from Fight the New Drug. Would love to hear your thoughts about it. Did you learn something new? Did it open your eyes in different ways? Are you going to have conversations with your kids about this that maybe you were hesitant to have before? Like I said, I really love to hear your thoughts, feelings, responses, emotions in relation to everything that Parker and I talked about. So email me at Christy@theheartfulparent.com. In the meantime, I know I say this often, but I always appreciate you sharing these episodes, sharing them with your partners, with your friends, with people who you think they might resonate with, or people who you think they might challenge. And I always appreciate you hopping into your favorite podcast app and sharing a testimonial. Also, newsflash, podcast is now available on YouTube. So if you've been struggling because it hasn't been there and it hasn't been where you like to listen to podcasts, it is now fully available on YouTube and you can get it there. All right, thanks everyone for tuning in, for sticking with us, for learning with me today. I will look forward to seeing you again next week. Cheers.